Gabrielle Weiniger, and welcome to this first edition of the Debka Files. Exclusive news and insight from around the world, only on ILTV. Coming up on this week's show, Saudi Arabia abandons its support for Syrian rebels, but backtracks on a comment that the embattled president has won the war. And America finds itself fighting alongside Lebanese Shiite militia Hezbollah in an unusual coalition against ISIS. But first, let's turn to North Korea. While the US and North Korea face off in a war of words, the isolated regime is solidifying its ties with Iran. A top North Korean official embarked on a 10-day visit to the Iranian capital Tehran Monday, leaving with several military accords in hand. But remember, the collaboration between Tehran and Pyongyang is nothing new. As long-standing partners in this field, North Korean engineers are already inside Iran, upgrading nuclear warheads for missiles. All the while, Iranian engineers are in Pyongyang studying North Korea's technology. To break it down, at the end of the month, Iran said it had successfully launched a Simorgh rocket into space for the first time, possibly carrying an experimental intelligence satellite. This came just ahead of the arrival of the high-level North Korean official to Iran. Now, the North Korean military was said to be working on a plan to fire 4 missiles into the waters around that US territory. But a new statement released today said leader Kim Jong-un could change his mind, depending on the actions of the United States. It's led to a sigh of relief on that Pacific island of Guam.
Photographs, they tell 1,000 words, right? So we'll leave it to Kim Jong-un to explain any actions that he takes. But we're happy that the rhetoric is starting to calm down, perhaps, from Kim Jong-un, and not at least pursuing at the moment his threats to fire missiles at Guam. Nobody wants any confrontation beyond the peace that we enjoy today on this resort destination. I'm reading between the lines that I don't see an imminent threat. That may be a personal view, but I think a lot of people are seeing the same thing, that there's maybe a sigh of relief that Kim Jong-un is saying something that is giving himself pause maybe for taking action against the United States and our citizens.
Well, moving to Saudi Arabia, where the kingdom has quit Syria and abandoned its support for rebel groups who have been fighting President Bashar al-Assad for 6 years. Saudi Foreign Minister Adel al-Jubeir made this statement in Riyadh on Wednesday to a delegation of the Syrian National Coalition. He leveled with the Syrian rebel leaders, informing them that the kingdom had reached the end of the road in the Syrian civil war. At that encounter, Saudi Arabia implied that al-Assad had won and predicted he would remain in power for many years, although this was later officially denied as inaccurate. To break it down, we're joined by Director of International Security Studies Center at the Haifa University, Dr. Daniel Shefton. Thanks so much for joining us here on Debka Files. Saudi Arabia washing its hands of this years-long bloody civil war. Is this a surprise move, and what brought it on?
Well, there are 2 factors we have to understand here. First of all, there is no credible so-called rebel element in Syria that you can work with outside the elements of Daesh and Al-Qaeda affiliates. The United States tried it for a very long time, and it didn't work.
So you're saying this is a failed policy from the US and from Saudi Arabia to even support so-called moderate rebels?
If there were moderate rebels, it would have been a great idea, only there is no such thing that is strong enough in Syria in order to be a viable alternative to the regime or to the Daesh forces. But there is something more fundamental here, and this is that Russian involvement made Bashar the winner of this war, because it made it impossible to eradicate this regime. The Russian involvement was on a level high enough to make it impossible to remove Bashar, and therefore everybody is accepting this reality, I think too soon and in too deep a way. But this is the trend that we are seeing. If we may look at it in a broader spectrum, in seeing a broader picture, the American and coalition fight against Daesh was a major mistake in that sense, that by focusing on one minor enemy, namely Daesh, it encouraged the big enemies of the United States, of Israel, of all the forces, Europeans, others, and Arabs who want stability, namely Iran, Turkey, and Russia. Iran is now moving into Syria, moving into Iraq in a way that threatens to reach the Mediterranean in a contiguous way from Tehran to Beirut. You also have Russia installing itself in Syria, in the Middle East, establishing a permanent base on the Mediterranean. And this is because the Americans basically said whatever is good against Daesh is the most important from an American point of view. So a much bigger and more serious enemy, namely the Iranians and the Russians, can establish themselves in this area.
You're saying that Russia and Iran are the main actors here. Does this mean al-Assad has won the war and it's the beginning of the end of the Syrian civil war?
No. It is the beginning of the end of completely getting rid of Assad and the Alawite control in Syria. There will be probably in the foreseeable future a kind of Alawite state where Assad is the president, or anybody succeeding Assad is the president, and in a barbarian way keeping itself in power. But this will be only on part of Syria, and on other parts of Syria what we are about to see is a combination of different terrorist organizations and local authorities that will establish themselves. There is only one positive element in all of this, and this is that the Kurds are also establishing themselves. This is the only good news in the Middle East since the beginning of this decade. Unfortunately, the American policy under Obama vis-a-vis Turkey made it more difficult for the Kurds, because Turkey is the main element that is fighting the Kurds. So what we will end up in Syria will be a regime under Assad control with Russian backing for part of the country, the west of the country, the most important part of Syria. And in the rest of Syria, we will have a kind of mix between different organizations. And for a very long time, I don't see the end of the war.
Let's take it back for a second to the topic. Does that mean that Saudi Arabia knows this and that's why they are withdrawing their support?
The Saudis know that in this particular sense, it's over. But the Saudis have demonstrated something very positive recently, and this was reflected in their position in policy vis-a-vis Qatar. For many, many decades, the Saudi Arabians were in a position of defensive against radicals in the Arab world. And it is only under Obama, when they realized they cannot trust the United States, that they began to understand that they have to take matters into their own hands and to fight radicals in the Arab Peninsula and throughout the Arab world. And they have today these radicals being led by Iranian forces, Iranian-backed forces. So they're willing to take very strong steps that they've never been willing to take in the past. And they have a coalition in the Gulf that is willing to go with them. For them, Syria is a secondary element at the moment, because their main element is Iran, and not their enemy is Iran and not Syria.
All right, strong steps there, Dr. Shefton. We'll leave it there for now. But stay with us as we stay with Hezbollah, and American special forces in the region have found themselves fighting in the same coalition as the Shiite militia group for the first time, alongside the Syrian army as well as Lebanese forces. The coalition is fighting to dislodge ISIS and al-Qaeda's Nusra Front from the Lebanese-Syrian border regions. A US-British airlift is delivering arms and ammunition to those forces. Here's Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah giving his pledge of support for the coalition.
لبناني سيقاتل في الأرض اللبنانية. أنا أعلن الليلة، طبعا هذا بلغنا عم نبلغ فيه المسؤولين، وأنا بدي بلغ رسميا وشعبيا. نحن حزب الله حيث نحن موجودون في الأراضي اللبنانية. نحن بخدمة الجيش اللبناني وقيادة الجيش اللبناني، بتصرف الجيش اللبناني. شو بدكم؟ احنا جاهزين. الجبهة السويرية أيضا ستفتح على داعش، حيث سيكون الجيش السوري وسيكون حزب الله في الجبهة السويرية. وأنا قلت المنطقة تقريبا مناصفة صايرة. ويمكن الحدود اللي سيتم القتال عليها في الجبهة السورية أطول شوي من الحدود التي يعني خط التماس الذي سيقاتل عليه في الجبهة اللبنانية.
Let's turn back to Dr. Daniel Sheftan from the University of Haifa, who's with us via Skype. We just heard that Hezbollah pledged to join the fight against ISIS on the Syria-Lebanon border. Why now?
Well, first of all, there are rebels and also Daesh rebels on the Syrian-Lebanese border, but basically Hezbollah is an Iranian militia. Iran, to understand the picture, you have to look at Iran. Iran is taking over parts of Iraq, parts of Syria, and also through Hezbollah, Lebanon, and the Syrian-Lebanese border. So what you have here, it's very clear who is on both sides of this war. On the one side, it is Assad, Hezbollah, and Iran. And on the other side, you have not only Daesh, but also people throughout the Sunni Arab world who are very, very concerned about what is happening with the takeover of Iran in the region. You have Jordan very concerned about Syrian and Hezbollah elements that are threatening Jordan from the north. You have Saudi Arabia very concerned about what is happening in Yemen and the threat to Saudi Arabia from this direction. Again, these are all, like Hezbollah, Iranian militias, the Houthis in Iran, in Yemen, the Hezbollah in Lebanon, the militias that have taken over Mosul. This is all part of the Iranian master plan.
Well, what does that mean in terms of border security then for places like Israel and Jordan, which share a frontier with Syria? Because the coalition is looking to oust ISIS and al-Nusra Front. So who's going to take their place?
This is really a very serious danger, both for Jordan and for Israel. Israel is determined not to take Iran and not to allow Iran and Hezbollah to take their place on the front with Israel, to open another front against Israel. Jordan has the same interest. The United States has the same interest. And the question is, how much is everybody willing now to confront these elements, particularly when Russia is in the picture? Again, Russia came to Syria because Obama made it possible by inviting everybody who wants to fight the terrorists, and they used this excuse and established themselves. So far, Trump is not showing that he is willing to confront it. He is more or less accepting this reality. And Israel and Jordan depend now to a very large extent on American support, because this is much bigger than Jordan and Israel can take on by themselves. You need to have an American understanding. You need to have an American backing. We didn't have anything we could trust during the Obama administration, and we're not sure what is happening today with the Trump administration. Remember, a very large part of the Trump administration is not in place yet. The experts are not in place yet. You don't know who you can talk with. Jordan and Israel are very concerned, as you said, but the question is, will they have full American backing?
Do you believe that the American priority is still, at this time, Daesh, still ISIS?
I think there is rethinking in America about everything, but unfortunately, with a very bad strategy gone, the Obama strategy, we don't yet have a Trump strategy. What we see so far are isolated moves here and there. There is something promising about Trump understanding that Trump is an enemy, not a friend. That this is very, very important, but this does not make a strategy yet. We don't yet have an American strategy in place, and it's very difficult when major forces like Russia are involved, when Iran is directly involved, to have a strategy without knowing where the Americans are going. And it's not clear in Washington either.
All right, we'll keep an eye on that, Dr. Daniel Sheftan from the University of Haifa. Thank you so much for your analysis. Meanwhile, Moscow is pumping thousands of former Russian elite troops hired as mercenaries from the private Wagner contractor to Syria's front lines. They're training the new Syrian Army 5th Corps and shaping it into a model of Russia's special forces. The new Syrian Corps has absorbed most of the foreign Shiite militia, which Iran imported over the years to fight for al-Assad under one roof. Russia is running its own airlift with heavy weapons, including tanks and missiles, for this new outfit. Let's shift away from Syria and take a look at what's going on in the battle against ISIS in Iraq. Less than a month after declaring victory in the second city of Mosul, Iraqi forces are readying for their next major battle, this time just 40 kilometers west of Mosul, in a city called Tel Afar. But tens of thousands of ISIS fighters from the de facto ISIS capital Raqqa and Mosul may be readying for their next assault. While some 3,000 fighters have withdrawn to Deir ez-Zor and Mayadin in eastern Syria, another 2,000 fighters across parts of the west and center of Syria, another 3,000 are dispersed throughout Iraqi towns, including Aywa, Qaim and Huwayja. But the remaining 8,000 fighters, Debka can reveal, have broken up into fighting cells and scattered themselves across rural towns and villages, not only in Iraq and Syria, but also in Jordan, Turkey, Lebanon, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Libya and Sudan. This week, a new report presented to the UN Security Council revealed that ISIS is still a dangerous and capable militant organization, despite its heavy losses in Syria and Iraq, and remains a significant military threat. But in spite of all that, the spokesperson for the Combined Joint Task Force and US Army colonel said ISIS is still losing. However, there lies a difficult battle ahead in Tel Afar.
ISIS does not have the same level of leadership it once had. They do not have the same level of grandeur. People just no longer want to come and join these terrorists. And they do not have the resources they once had. ISIS is losing and will continue to lose under the pressure of our partner forces and the coalition until they are defeated in Iraq and Syria. The coalition estimates there are about 2,000 ISIS fighters in and around Tel Afar. We fully expect this to be a difficult fight to root out ISIS from one of their last strongholds in Iraq.
Moving on to Saudi Arabia, where a town in the eastern Qatif province has been under siege for 3 months by its own government. The kingdom is looking to flush out gunmen seen as responsible for years of attacks on police by minority Shiites against the Sunni government. And now Riyadh is cracking down on elements it labels a Shiite terror network as backed by Iran. The neighborhood of Awamiya was also home to Nimr al-Nimr, the prominent Shia cleric executed on terrorism charges last year that led to mass demonstrations. The 400-year-old district has been transformed into a war zone, as you're seeing on your screens now, and under constant barrage of heavy fire, with snipers targeting anyone on foot, preventing medical aid from reaching victims. Locals report between 12 to 25 people have died in shelling and sniper fire, and more than 20,000 residents forced to flee. But while protesters on the ground cite a dire humanitarian situation that looks more like Syria than the oil-rich eastern province, the mayor of Awamiya says this is just a planned urban development. Take a listen.
بالطبع المشروع يعني الحقيقة تم التفكير فيه والبدء فيه من أكثر من 6 سنوات، وتم إعلام جميع من في المنطقة بأنه سيتم مراحل تطويرية لعدة مناطق في القطيف. بدأ بحي المسورة في وسط العوامية وهو المرحلة الأولى. لن يحظى بموافقة الجميع، ولكن أغلب من في القطيف وسكان العوامية.
Let's move now to the news in brief. Iran threatens military action against Iraqi Kurdish cities if the semi-autonomous KRG goes ahead with its planned independence referendum in September. The Debka Files can report that the 2 Kurdish encounters with Iranian officials ended in a stalemate and left the impression that a military showdown involving Iran, Erbil and Baghdad would not be far off. Turkey is massing troops along its Syrian border, ready to jump 2 ways, to either seize the Syrian Kurdish enclave of Afrin or launch an offensive against ISIS and al-Qaeda-linked Nusra Front strongholds in the northern Syrian province of Idlib. Israel is building a huge sensor-equipped underground wall, 40 meters deep and 6 meters high, running 60 kilometers around the Gaza Strip. It's a move to stop tunnels between the 2 sides. Now, Israel warning Gaza's Hamas rulers not to try to foil its construction. And Turkey has also begun construction on a 144-kilometer-long barrier along its border with Iran. It's a move aimed at stopping Kurdish separatists and illegal smugglers from crossing the Turkish-Iranian front, and is similar to the one being built along its 911-kilometer frontier with Syria. Well, that wraps up this week's show. Just a sample of the Debka Weekly newsletter you can get straight to your inbox. For the full range of exclusive news and insights, you can sign on at www.debka.com/weekly. Thanks for joining us here at Debka File from the ILTV studios in Tel Aviv. See you again next week. Bye-bye for now.